Hello everyone, you might notice that this audio sounds perfectly nice and crisp and clear. Well, it's become, I kind of said last week, I feel like I always have technical issues whenever I respond to JammiDodger. I'm sure that's not actually true, but here's what the audio from my microphone sounded like for the bonus video I just did of JammiDodger. Here it is now.
Anyway, so essentially, if you remember last time, we had some technical difficulties. They honestly weren't my fault. I'll just admit it.
So as you can hear, that sounds absolutely awful. This audio might not sound as good as my regular audio because I usually do some noise reduction, a bit of compression, stuff like that, which I'm probably not going to bother with. But yeah, either way, I concluded that the better sounding audio will be the audio that was captured by my camera. So you are going to be hearing the camera mic quality for this video. It should be tolerable. It won't sound clear and crisp and nice, but it will sound okay. Yeah, just crazy. Apart from that, though, everything was alright, I guess. Whatever.
Hello, everyone. I think last time I was here, I said that this would be the last time you saw my old headphones. I do need to still get some new headphones. Oh, this is not very well thingied. And also, I have no. Am I really high, really low? I don't know. Whatever. I'm just gonna be where I am. Yeah, basically, these. You saw the headphones last time. I covered in duct tape. I'm incredibly thirsty. I'm always incredibly thirsty when I start this. Anyway, so essentially, if you remember last time, we had some technical difficulties. They honestly weren't my fault. I'll just admit it. I got totally distracted from recording the video. Was browsing social media on the internet, and then because I kind of I guess overworked my computer from the sheer amount of social everything that I was doing or whatever, all the tabs I had open. From the I can't think what the word I'm looking for, chasm, bottomless pit of content, whatever you want to call it. That basically my computer kind of crashed, and then I lost this recording. So now I'm locked in. But yeah, I mean, ultimately the key thing there is, even if I hadn't have crashed the computer, it still would have been a shorter episode than usual, because I didn't spend most of the time I was supposed to spend recording the episode actually recording it, which again, I'm not going to let happen this time. I'm back with a renewed sense of purpose. Anyway, yeah, sorry everyone, I've been jipping you this whole time because I usually allow myself 5 minutes to make breakfast. Makes sense, of course. But I just discovered that for some reason in my little schedule where I kind of keep track of how long I should be expecting to do each thing, I've only I've basically given myself 0 minutes to make breakfast. And you might be like, well, why is that taken away from us? Well, the thing is, I usually do breakfast during the time when I'm recording. So yeah, I'll be in the middle of recording. Anyway, whatever. So, but yeah, I'll just say one other thing before we start. Let's say two other things. I'll give you a house update. I'm sure you're interested in the house. So basically, today I need to go over and actually start working on the on the room that will become this room. Now, it will be a very different room from this room. It will be marginally bigger, which will be nice. But also, yeah, I'm going to try and make sure that it has a little bit more character to it. And it's not just, the blank bookshelf of the book. I mean, the books are fun. But yeah, something even more exciting than that. Whatever. That's what I'm doing today. But the other big thing is that, and I think I kind of communicated this already, a source of frustration has been realizing how many things with this house are not up to the standard that they should have been done to, and that's caused us issues. So things like realizing that instead of plastering the brickwork, these people just put wallpaper up directly over the brick. So we then had to remove the wallpaper, which was way more difficult because it was stuck. And then we've had to get an actual plasterer in. So essentially, yeah, there's things that just in a normal house you would think it should already be like this. A normal house should already be plastered there was one particular room where it seemed like they had painted onto the brick and then plastered over the paint and then put wallpaper on the plaster. But the problem is that meant because the plaster was directly on the paint, it didn't stick. So it was just like chipping off. Anyways, things like that. So essentially, with all that said though, yesterday I went into the attic, or I believe a loft if you're American, and I discovered something rather wonderful. The attic is already halfway towards being converted into a room. It has plasterboard either side of the attic, and they've even installed, I say they, I don't know who they is, but they've even installed radiators. So like already like all of the plumbing and the kind of, as it relates to the heating, is already in place. So it actually seems like it'll be quite cheap to turn the attic into a bedroom, which would of course increase the number of bedrooms. The only problem there is that, you know, we'd have to make it so the attic is more accessible, because right now there's just like this rickety ladder to get up there, which wouldn't be great if you wanted it to be a meaningfully usable bedroom. But yeah, I feel like there's definitely opportunities there to have the attic seem a lot nicer. It also has a window in there as well. Anyway, so that's that. And the only other final thing I'll say, just because this is, yesterday I was, you know, whatever, doing what I do, and then my mum was like, "Oh, Michael, blah, 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 your dad was doing some watering in the garden. He leaned down and one of the stakes that the tomato, like one of the tomato plants was supported on, went into his eye and punctured it." And I was like, Jesus, like, that makes it sound like, I was thinking like, so he's like he's lost his vision. Like I was thinking he's going to have to wear an eye patch for the rest of his life. Because punctured, to me, that sounds like his eyeball is like burst at that point. Like, you know, you've got like your, like that's it. Like that doesn't sound, that sounds like horrible. Anyway, and then she was like, "Oh, actually, well, you know, like maybe punctured is too strong a word. He's just kind of hurt it." So it was one of those things where I was like, that was a real roller coaster of emotions. But the thing is, it does seem like it actually like hurt. I mean, as you can imagine, like it's still you know, I think human beings are pretty, it's the kind of like reflex thing. I mean, I've heard it said that the reason we have eyelashes is so that like our eyelashes can kind of detect whether something's about to go in our eye and make us close our eyes before whatever it is hits us. I don't know how good that is. Like, to me, I would feel like there are so many things that can be moving at fast speed, and anything that's going to damage your eye is going to be moving at fast speed, that your ability to like close your eyelids quickly, it's not going to make a difference. Surely, like I just can't imagine a scenario, like even though I've heard this, I can't imagine a scenario where something hits my eyelash and whatever speed that thing's traveling at, even like a relatively low speed, I just can't imagine a situation where something hits my eyelash and obviously I'm not suggesting I consciously do it, but even if it's just a reflex, I just can't imagine. I've honestly wanted to make a video. This sounds very strange because probably not the kind of thing you'd imagine I would make a video about. But I've often wanted to like make a video about how it doesn't really make sense to me that we haven't evolved backups of everything. Like it's weird that when you think about the things that you need two of, you really do need two legs. You pretty much need two arms. Like you are seriously disadvantaged if you just have one arm. And when it comes to eyes, you know, depth perception is seemingly a pretty important thing. It seems like it's quite important that we have two eyes. And with all that said, I thought to myself, it doesn't really make much sense to me, considering how it's not unheard of for people to, and I say people, organisms in general, to lose legs and limbs and eyes. You would think that having 3 of one of those things instead of 2, so that you have a backup, basically having one more than you need, would confer enough of an advantage that we would have actually evolved to have 3 of them. I don't know. To me, that just makes sense. Like, I I spend a lot of time, to be honest, thinking about things going in people's eyes. It's, oh, goodness me. So yeah, anyway, I'm like going to be. I feel like that's going to be one area where if I have kids, I'm going to be super like protective about that. Like you know, if they're like running around with anything remotely sharp, I'll be like, hey, or like anything that is, you know, because it doesn't even have to be sharp, right? That's like the crazy thing about your eyes. Something doesn't have to be super sharp to damage them. It just has to have force, whatever. Anyway, so we're going to get into this video now. JammiDodger, the destruction of trans rights in the UK. Just jump in. I'll pause when I have something to say, and I will say the thing that I have to say, and then we will unplay and continue. Sorry, unpause, and we will continue watching the video. Does that make sense? I hope you will consent to that.
But how will they know who is a trans woman? This really just feels like it's giving people the freedom to say,
hey, I think you're a trans woman, prove me wrong.
Okay, so yeah, obviously that, how will they know who's a trans woman? It's silly because the number of times you genuinely can't tell is very low. Now, I'm not someone who said we can always tell. That's like, you know, I think that is not a position I would uphold. But yeah, basically, I would say that it's not as if this is a massive challenge. And by the way, for the record, in the times when you genuinely can't tell, it matters a lot less. Because especially when we talk about people's privacy and people's boundaries, if you, like a lot of people say, like, oh, I don't want to have to be in the presence of a biological male. If we're talking about a biological male who has so feminized themselves that they basically look like a woman, in that context, it is probably going to be less offensive to someone to know that, because they're going to be like, okay, well, when I say biological male, I especially mean someone who looks like basically, I don't want to be in a situation where I know that I'm doing that. Like, that's kind of, I'm not saying it doesn't matter, I'm just saying it matters less. And I feel like it's very reasonable to say that some of the laws about sex segregation or whatever are working on an assumption. What really matters is if you're a woman, you don't want to have to be sat there pretending a biological male is a woman when he's obviously not. Whereas that's not an issue if we're in a situation where this is someone and you can't even tell that they are biologically male. Like, that doesn't matter anything like as much.
trans people can also change all of their ID documentations like passports and birth certificates, so having an F on any documents is not going to prove to an officer.
Well, again, some people might say that actually you should change that and people's identity should recognize them as the biological sex which they are, which would solve this problem. It's kind of funny. People say, like, oh, how are you going to know who's a man or woman without genital inspections? And it's like, well, if we're granting that people are going to follow the law, we could very easily just have an identifier on people, like essentially get rid of the option that lets biological males say that they literally are women on their official government documents, because official government documents maybe shouldn't be lying.
And then generally, how does putting rules in place that allows people to overly scrutinize any woman and any woman's femininity protect any woman? The answer is, it doesn't. It just puts all women.
So again, you say over scrutinize. Like, the idea that this is about focusing on the people who, they look totally like a woman, but maybe they're not actually like a woman. No, this is about the biological males who are obviously biological males, where, again, there are lots of reasons why it would be more offensive to someone to be told they have to treat that person like a woman who is obviously biologically male. And you don't have to be scrutinizing anything in detail to see that that person's biologically male, which is part of why it's so offensive, because it's such a kind of expectation of denying obvious reality that people are just not going to like. People aren't going to be like being told to lie.
The exact opposite of the feminism they claim to be doing and having. TERFs will argue that excluding trans women from women's spaces will make cis women safer, partly because it will stop cis men from being able to pretend that they're trans women and then accessing these women's spaces. In reality, trans women...
Really, really stupid comment there. Sorry, I just wasn't... I felt like I moved my camera and then realized I didn't like where it was. Anyway, yeah, this idea, and this is something people say all the time, it's this idea that the only problem with trans identity is the people who are insincere about it. No. some of these, if not the majority of individuals who are a problem here, are biological males who sincerely believe they're women and expect to be accommodated in that regard. This idea that it's all about cis men pretending to be trans women, no, it could just as easily be the genuine true believers. And I actually don't think that, people who aren't trans pretending to be is actually that much of a realistic problem in the first place.
Men have been using women's spaces in public for decades without issue.
Again, so the problem with this argument is that this would actually cohere with pretty much what I said, which is that the main solution is just a situation where people aren't emboldened to draw attention to themselves. Because, I mean, what did I basically say, right? If we're talking about a biological male who literally has just feminized himself so much that he, well, like that you would look and be like, oh, okay, whatever, that's a kind of tall woman, you would say, then, to be honest, who really, like, it's just not something that's likely to be an issue, because this guy's basically castrated. And I'm not saying that the entirety of why biological males are a threat to women is, tied up with their sexual vigor, and the moment that you castrate a biological male, he immediately becomes not a threat. But I would say that that is a significant thing that is likely to underpin that. And I'd also say that a big reason why biological males are a threat to women is because of toxic masculinity, and as such, a biological male who willingly denies his maleness by being castrated is unlikely to have that as an issue. And yeah, that is why, ignoring the fact, by the way, that also if we're talking about biological males who pass as women, these are probably going to be twinky, short guys in the first place who, will draw less attention to themselves. And the contrast here would be with what you then allow for if you say, oh, trans identity is actually going to be something that we completely accept in society and go out of our way to accommodate, which is that now you will have biological males who don't even care, don't even pretend to care about trying to convince people that they're women. And those people are, ignoring the fact they're automatically going to make women more uncomfortable because it's going to be obvious to a biological, there's not even plausible deniability. A biological or, a woman is just going to be aware, oh, this is a man right next to me. This is a man who's just walked into the women's bathroom. So that's issue number one. Number two, of course, these biological males have not been castrated or anything like that. These are biological males who are just biological males in the same sense I am. So any sense in which they could be a threat remains. And thirdly, of course, they're not going to be sheep. That essentially, they also have entitlement. And I think that when you look at male sexual violence against women, entitlement is going to be a huge part of that. So that's another threat. Yeah, I am actually willing to say if we had a situation where there was kind of an attitude of de jure sex segregation, but de facto, if you have, as a biological male, undermined and chipped away at the reality of your biological sex so much with surgery that you've basically been completely feminized, and most people just wouldn't look twice at you going into a woman's bathroom, you can go in there de facto because, let's be honest, you're unlikely to cause a problem. And that was the system we had until a decade ago, when suddenly it became all about, oh, let's actively encourage and even celebrate biological males entering women's spaces. So, and that is when we started seeing issues.
There's also no evidence that cis men are pretending to be trans women to gain access to these spaces. So it's a threat that's been totally made up by transphobes in the first place. And it's just
And again, there's also this whole thing about it's a threat that's been made up. Part of the issue is violating people's boundaries. So you can't say it's a threat. And yeah, this is kind of this thing people do where they almost say what do you think will happen if so-and-so occurs? And they don't seem to understand that it's not about, oh, I'm worried about this because it will lead to something else. This thing is a problem in itself. Nobody's saying, oh, if there's women who value having their own female-only space and they don't want biological males there because that would make them feel deeply uncomfortable, then we shouldn't allow biological males into those spaces. And you say, yeah, but what do you think is going to happen if those biological males go in there? Because actually the studies show that nothing bad is going to happen. It's like, well, no, hold a minute. Something bad is going to happen because I literally just told you how a load of women would feel about that. And that feeling of being violated is going to be a very serious problem for them. And you certainly, can't say that their feelings don't matter if you're going to be the people who are like, oh, we should completely turn biological sex on its head to accommodate men's feelings.
As a distraction to the real threat, which is predatory cis men, not trans people, and we should be focusing on the areas and situations where women are most at risk from these predatory cis men, including trans women who are at a very...
Yeah. Okay, by the way, and also it's just, this is like it's the classic thing I pointed out before. Someone who's like constantly stressing, cis men versus trans women, blah, blah. The stupid thing about this is you're making this distinction because clearly to you think it matters that this distinction exists. The problem is that there is no, this distinction is meaningless in your worldview. Because any cis man could just say, oh, I actually am a woman. Sincerely, I am a woman. And according to you, that then causes him to become a trans woman, right? Unless you can define meaningfully what actually defines someone as trans, drawing a big distinction between, these people think we're talking about trans people, we're actually talking about cis people, that doesn't mean anything.
Great risk of violence. Instead of saying that it's trans women that are the problem, they're just being used as a scapegoat and a distraction from the real issue. I don't understand how...
Sorry, okay. Wait. So, I kind of briefly blanked for a second, but what's the argument there being made that people are focusing on trans women so they don't have to focus on the danger that cis men, regular men, place upon or pose to women? Because I wouldn't say that's the case at all. Certainly gender critical feminists, even, ones that are kind of more extreme in their opposition to the whole trans thing and kind of, more caustic about it, I guess. Even they would still say, yeah, but the ultimate issue here is with men in women's spaces. This isn't a trans thing so much as it's a men thing.
This whole attack was aimed towards trans women. A majority of the transphobia we see.
For some reason, my computer's being slow. I don't know why. I don't want to know why. I'm just a little bit concerned with my computer being slow that, it could cause issues. There's also a bug here. I'm going to try and kill it. I don't really have to. It's got to move faster than I can. Okay, that was actually surprisingly easy.
Is aimed towards trans women.
Yeah, I don't really get. It seems weird to me, on the subject of evolution, which I was mentioning earlier. It's very weird to me that there are some flies, flies, regular flies, the little buzzy ones. They have kind of superpowers. They are so difficult to kill. It's you move a centimeter and they buzz away. They're so good at that. And I don't really understand why it is that in contrast to that, there are lots of other bugs, like moths, and even some crane, some flies, like crane flies and stuff like that. I don't know if they're technically considered flies. Maybe they're not. But yeah, there are a lot of other flying insects which have nothing like that ability to anticipate being squashed. That was just so easy. I was just kind of leaning over. I had a tissue. I didn't want to squish it with my bare hands. Leaning over. In case, I don't know if I still sound kind of congested, I have a whole load of tissues next to my computer because I've just been blowing my nose constantly. So not only did that fly get killed, but it was kind of with a bit of a dried snotty tissue.
Those campaigning clearly forgot that trans men exist, because defining the term woman in the Equality Act under biological sex, they're inadvertently including trans men under the definition of women.
Okay, so yeah, this is the thing it always comes back to. And you know what? It is a genuinely interesting point. Certainly a lot more interesting than, talking about so-called cis men as a distinct... whatever. But this like thing of, what about a biological female who has made herself look massively like a man? Wouldn't that cause people discomfort? This is a point, and look, I've said my opinion on this before. I do think it is the only actually practically workable opinion, which is that there does have to be, for certain things, an acknowledgement of the value in a legal fiction where we say, all right, in terms of how society is going to operate, it will confuse people more if we always treat you according to your biological sex. So in select circumstances, we can override that. And that has been my opinion. I think that's the opinion that makes sense.
And therefore offering the same protections to trans men that women get. I don't think TERFs even thought about this, and neither did a...
Okay, hold on. Okay, so this is not an unreasonable thing to afford to trans men the same protections that women get. Because one thing that I can think of, and by the way, I'm pretty sure there's even like a film about this, like a film made by like a trans creator. And I mean, I would not be at all surprised to hear this is a quite common thing, is that trans identified females, for all sorts of reasons, I think are going to be uniquely vulnerable. I think like the types of reasons why someone might become a trans-identify as a man, if you get what I'm saying, a so-called trans man, that's the word I'm looking for. I think one of the reasons why someone might do that is if they already have a mental health illness, or they have some kind of trauma, or maybe they have like they come from a broken home. They have like issues with the way that gender was like expressed to them growing up and things like that. And all of those issues, I would say, correlate to being at risk of sexual assault. You know, obviously there's all sorts of reasons why sexual assault can happen, but I would imagine that if you are someone who, you know, like has mental health issues, you have like a past history of trauma and things like these are all things that could kind of make it, I think, because my understanding is of sexual assault is that predators kind of have like a sense of how easy would this person be to victimize. And insofar as, and again, I'm not like an expert on this, but insofar as I know anything about it, being someone who already has kind of a sense of weakness, so kind of like a chink in your armor of like self-esteem or whatever, makes you more vulnerable. And like by contrast, I would say that a woman who is incredibly self-confident, and again, I'm not saying like this completely saves her of anything, but, and you know, has been raised in like a really kind of loving, supportive environment, has a reason to basically want to take care of herself and all that kind of stuff, is way less at risk. The point is, and I would say there are plenty, and I'm sure you guys didn't even need me to say any of that, because I'm sure you guys can think of plenty of examples of where actually, yeah, it does make sense to say that trans men should be afforded the same protections as women, because, again, the key thing here is that ultimately the only thing that defines them as trans men is claiming not to be women. And claiming not to be something doesn't stop you being that thing.
A lot of people, as can be shown in this clip right here.
Trans men then have to use women's toilets. That's going to make women less safe, because how are you going to stop a man, a normal man, going into a woman's toilets and saying, I'm a trans man?
Yeah, so this is, and it's absolutely something which I can imagine people get tripped up on, because it's just something people aren't going to think of. And it is, yeah, definitely something you do need to actually think about, because yeah, there's not only the fact, because what you could say is you could say, oh, I don't care if trans men even like bearded up, roided on testosterone, is that the expression? Like entering women's spaces, because whatever, the fact that they are biologically female means I'm not bothered by that. However, there's lots of biological males who could say, oh yeah, I'm actually a woman on testosterone. And even if you're, because again, I know this is the we can always tell thing. Even if you're someone who's saying like, no, I'll always be able to immediately say, no, absolutely you're not, I can 100%. Do you think everyone can? Again, it's not, like I would just say, and again, yeah, this is what has led to me arriving at the position which I have arrived at, which is no, if there is a situation where due to material changes you have made to your body, it would be more confusing for people for you to use the facilities that align with your biological sex. In that context, you should, basically be allowed to forego this law. I think the law should essentially have a little, what's the word? An exception, I guess, would be the basic word for it. I feel like there's a fancier legal term for it. But yeah, basically an exception that says you are legally obligated to use the bathroom that corresponds, we'd probably say toilet, whatever, lavatories, that correspond to your biological sex, unless you have consulted with a agent of the state, because I think this isn't something that people should just be allowed to self-assess themselves, and it has been determined that you look sufficiently like a member of the opposite sex that it would cause major confusion and anxiety for you to actually use the bathroom that corresponds with your biological sex. In which case, for that specific case, you can have an exception. But again, this would not be a gender recognition certificate. It wouldn't say, oh, you actually therefore are the biological sex that you claim to be. No, it would just be saying in specific social contexts where it would cause more confusion and more stress and make things more difficult for everyone if you use the facilities that correspond to your biological sex, you can be allowed not to do that.
Why?
Because the point is that we're saying that people who are biologically men shouldn't be using women's toilets. That's the point of this rule.
Oh, I mean, yeah, that's the other thing here, which kind of like I've stressed before. There's the matter of should you enforce it, but I also think it's worth appreciating the value in saying as a moral principle that women's single-sex spaces should be protected. And it's essentially a question of, like, how do you weigh the practicality of that? Because obviously in an ideal society, you could say, well, everyone will obey the law, and we should just live our lives trusting that everyone should obey the law. And therefore, as long as the law says, use the bathroom that corresponds to your biological sex, well, in that sense, it doesn't matter. Because even if you do see someone who looks 100% like a bloke in the women's bathroom, you can say, well, I know we have a law that says people must use the bathroom that corresponds to their biological sex, therefore that must be a biological female, therefore, fantastic, it's no problem. The issue is, of course, that we live in a world where people don't always obey the law, and therefore you do have to consider the practicalities of what should you actually do to make people feel comfortable in a world where a reasonable fear is that someone might not be using the bathroom that corresponds to their biological sex. And I think in that context, ironically, you actually have to allow for the possibility sometimes people might choose not to use the bathroom that corresponds to their biological sex because they think that will make people more uncomfortable.
Someone who's transitioned from being a woman to a man is...
And so they would then have to use women's toilets.
Yeah, I will say the problem with this is like a dunk, is that you are showing someone talking to a clearly pretty old, like I would guess, 40s politician here, who probably doesn't know a huge amount about this issue. And yeah, he's unlikely to be like, trans men, blah, blah, blah. Because from his perspective, I don't want to say like, oh, he just like passed this law without really thinking about it. But the reality is that I think sometimes politicians do pass laws without fully knowing exactly like the intricate details of what they're talking about. And that's not necessarily an issue because politicians, get this, sometimes they're not that smart. The real question here, and the test would be for whether or not like what he's done is right, is how would someone who does know a lot about this specific issue, who has considered the concern about trans men, how would they respond to this question? Because essentially, all we're seeing here, God love him, is some random politician who's probably like just hearing about the concept of trans men for the first time, being like, I don't know. But again, it's not that impressive that you can dunk on him.
I think this...
Is this like I feel like it's silent, right? But like this would be an opportunity where I feel like someone would play the Curb Your Enthusiasm meme. Although I do hate that meme. Oh yeah, see? There we go.
By defining access to gendered spaces based on biological birth sex, you are pushing trans men into women's spaces. Question: do you think it's easier for a cis man to pretend to be a trans woman to gain access to a women's bathroom, or pretend to be a trans man, where he literally would not need to do anything? Because in my day-to-day life, if I don't tell people I'm a...
Okay, so for the record, for neither of those things would he have to do anything in some sense, because obviously the definition of a trans woman doesn't involve wearing, like, getting surgery. It doesn't involve wearing makeup. It doesn't involve how you present yourself. It's about how you identify. So it's not accurate to say, now you could say, well, you know, obviously people do have some expectation of how a trans person should look. Even then, by the way, like, all they would need to do is just put on a wig, put on a makeup, put on a dress, which isn't very hard at all. But then obviously with the trans man thing, the problem is it depends how tall the biological male in question is, right? Like in my case, I'm 6 foot. I got pretty broad shoulders. I'm a chunky guy. If I went in and I said, yeah, actually I'm a woman, people would be like, oh my goodness, like what kind of woman were you? Like, did you like an orc woman? Because yeah, that's the thing. And like I say that, like I'm not like some super tall guy. I mean, I'm 6 foot. That's whatever. There's like people who are taller than me. But I mean, to be fair, and there are women who are taller than me. But the point is that's incredibly rare. And again, obviously, there's also the width. Men tend to be wider in terms of their muscular skeletal structure. I think that if I tried to walk into and I'm willing to take myself as a pretty representative sample of men, although I don't know, I think maybe now with all the endocrine disruptors and all the, you know, hormones they're putting in the water, maybe we've got a lot of very feminized biological males running around, and maybe the average man now is much more could much more easily pass as a biological female on testosterone. But yeah, basically, let's just grant that I am, you know, still a representative sample of the average man. If I walked into a woman's bathroom and said, yeah, I'm actually I'm a woman. I'm a woman who has taken testosterone. I think people would say, well, no, testosterone doesn't change your entire jaw structure. It doesn't change your, like, the width of your shoulders. It doesn't change your height. There are many, many things about you which just couldn't be the result of just taking testosterone. They can only be the result of having developed as a biological male, because that's how your body was supposed to develop. Whereas, obviously, I could put on makeup, a dress, a wig, and say, yeah, you know, it's really difficult for me because of how I was born, but I'm just really trying to pass as my true self as a woman. That would be... So, the kind of answer is, it depends. If we're talking about a biological male who's maybe a little bit shorter, maybe a little bit less muscular, a little bit more slender in terms of his, you know, skeleton, maybe for him it would be easier to, like, I can think about dudes I know where I'm like, okay, yeah, they could just about pass as a trans man, and say, like, you know, well, I'm thinking about, like, guys I know who are, like, pretty skinny or pretty pretty short, or indeed pretty chubby, because I feel like if you're chubby, it kind of makes your the definition of your skeleton less obvious. But yeah, the point is, for those people, I'd say, okay, yeah, they could maybe, like, it would be easier for them to say, oh yeah, I am a trans-identified female. They wouldn't use that language. Yeah, I am a female who has taken testosterone. Okay, cool. Maybe people would believe that, and they would literally have to do nothing. But the problem is, for someone like me and many other men, literally nobody would believe that. So, and by the way, I mean, this is ignoring the fact that the average man isn't white, right? I mean, the average man is Asian, which is okay, whatever. But like, I was going to say, for example, black men. In my experience, there's like more of a experience. As far as I know, there is way more of a what's the word? Like, I guess a distinction between male and female in black people, especially. So for almost like every single black dude, it's kind of like, there's no way that, like, when I think about every black guy I know, I'm not like, he could not say, oh, actually, I'm a woman who's just taken testosterone.
But so many spaces, including like changing rooms and toilets in public places like shopping centres in the UK, will have signs on them that are like, just letting you know, this bathroom may be attended by staff of any gender. Meaning that predatory cis men who wanted to go in a woman's bathroom never needed to be trans at all. Trans women, trans...
Yeah, I mean, well, that's the thing. And also, you can just sneak in there, right? Like, that's the thing. And I've kind of said this, I literally said this, I think a few videos back. I don't think it was in this video, or it wasn't in this video, but I think it was even like in the, last week when I was responding to this. But yeah, I would absolutely say this idea that, like the whole bathroom thing will avoid people, how am I going to word this? This idea that policing who goes into a bathroom is about preventing sexual assault is nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. And I basically have explained the reason why before, right? Because if the only reason why a biological male would need to pretend to be a woman to enter a woman's space is if he's in a public space where he's likely to be called out on that. But in a public space, he's not going to be able to get away with sexually assaulting someone. So obviously, if he's going to actually literally sexually assault someone, that's going to have to be somewhere private, somewhere quiet. But of course, in that case, he doesn't need to pretend to be anything. Like, he could just walk in. Like, yeah, that's the thing. So I just don't think that's the issue. The issue is about women's sense of safety and privacy and I guess kind of like dignity, like the sense of, oh, this is my space that I occupy and, it's where I belong or whatever.
Man, forget it, didn't even need to go near pretending to be trans, just had to pretend to be a cleaning staff or maintenance staff. Or, guess what, because there's no lock on these bathrooms, there's nobody at the door checking people's genitalia,
Exactly.
They can just walk in. That is what a predatory cis man would do if they wanted to gain access. They would.
Yeah, and that's why, this shouldn't really be about concern over predatory cis men entering women's spaces. This should be about concern of delusional biological males who pretend that they're trans being allowed to walk into women's spaces, no questions asked. And that is intrinsically a violation of women's right to privacy.
Plus, you'd think that the TERFs that were so concerned about cis women's safety and men accessing women's spaces would have brought it up as a point that cleaning and maintenance and staff in these public facilities of any gender can enter the women's bathrooms and...
Okay, and the other thing I would stress there is there is an honesty around that. Like, I personally have walked into a bathroom before to find a woman, cleaning it, and they said, oh, sorry, let me just, evacuate myself or whatever. And yeah, boom. Like, there's a sense of, oh, I recognize this is not an okay, well, how do I say not okay? I recognize that there's kind of an awkwardness to the fact that I'm here as someone of my sex and you're here as someone of your sex. And that's it. And yeah, from what I've seen, again, it's kind of weird because I haven't really walked into a woman's bathroom, and maybe I'm just secondhand remembering what other people have said. But the biological males who clean women's toilets they'll put up a sign saying, "Hey, I'm in here." And if a woman needs to use it, they'll often be very quick to say, "Oh, let me leave, let me step outside." Usually, these people who are in charge of cleaning toilets are very respectful when it comes. You know what I might actually be thinking of? I just realized that movie. What was it called? Perfect Days. The Japanese movie about the guy who works for a toilet cleaning company. Yeah, he's very quick to move out the way whenever there's a woman there. But yeah, I think the other thing is the honesty, right, of saying these are people of the incorrect sex are going to be in these toilets potentially as part of cleaning them. Whereas that is different from saying, oh no, these people are like, it's perfectly appropriate for these people to be in the toilet because this biological male is a woman. What bothers me with that, I think, is the dishonesty. If there was science that said, hey, just so you know, we're a trans-inclusive place, so there may be people of both sexes in both toilets, I think people would kind of have an issue with that. Obviously, I'm not saying that people, oh, that's fine. But I think people would be like, well, at least there's the honesty there. You know, like, at least there's a sense of, oh, you know, like, they're admitting this is... And also they're kind of saying, like, they're acknowledging this as something worth acknowledging, rather than just saying, oh, yeah, it's the norm that you should have biological males in women's toilets. So, yeah, like, that honesty thing, I think, can't be understated as relevant.
Because what I can say that's happened since this ruling and that I've seen as a trans man, it has driven home to me more and more how much of a minority this level of transphobia is, and how much it is just a really loud, unfortunately powerful and rich minority. And that's why they've gained...
Unfortunately powerful and rich minority. Again, I pointed this out before, there is a lot of evidence to show that trans ideology has been advanced by some very rich, elite minority of people, and what they're pushing for is not supported by the majority of individuals. You can mention, like, oh, J.K. Rowling, she's rich. Yeah, but, like, at the end of the day, it's not as if, like, she just gives people a load of money and then they decide to oppose trans people. Like, I wish I mentioned this before. I'm on my Patreon. JK, where are you? You should be watching this right now.
Traction, however, a minority. Since the judgment, the level of support for the trans community that I've seen is the biggest I have ever seen in the UK since I've started creating.
That's really interesting because, to me, and again, I think this video is a little bit old from JammiDodger, but I would say, honestly, that I almost catch myself thinking like, oh, the whole gender critical thing is basically over, right? And I don't mean over because we've lost, I mean over because we've won, which isn't exactly true. But it seems like at this point, everyone is like the anti-trans thing is kind of just mainstream now. Yeah, it just seems like every day there's like a new story I see, which seems to be about kind of trans people taking L's. So yeah, I would not agree with this idea. There's been some big backlash that Jamie can be excited about.
Creating content since I came out as trans. Major celebrities are speaking up and raising money, including...
I've literally never heard of Nicola Coughlan in my life. Who is that person? Nicola Coughlan.
Including Nicola Coughlan, who helped raise more than £100,000 for the trans charity Not a Phase.
It's not just that I don't know her name, I don't even know her appearance.
Pedro Pascal, who's called...
Okay, I do know Pedro Pascal.
J.K. Rowling a heinous loser, so accurate, and worn a Protect the Dolls t-shirt on a red carpet and continues to share things in support of the trans community.
That's really interesting, Protect the Dolls, because the thing about calling transsexuals dolls is that I always thought that was kind of like an edgy trans thing. And it was kind of almost like said as like a judgment. Like, there's this one trans person I follow on Twitter, or I think used to follow, and then I kind of got bored of them. But yeah, basically, this individual was like, constantly talking about like being a doll and stuff like that, and was also very judgmental about biological males who didn't pass. So essentially, the shtick was like, we are dolls, and dolls are great because dolls are biological males who look like women, but there's all these disgusting, like, T-slurs. Like, this is one of those people who would literally, like, say that. And they're just gross, and they just like men, and they're, like, no one likes them. Get them away from us. So yeah, that kind of, like, thing of using dolls in, like, the only context I've ever seen dolls used is typically by, I guess what are called parsoids, making fun of, like, essentially drawing attention to just how feminine they look, saying, we are dolls. We're literally so feminine. We're, like, full-on bimbos, whatever. So, yeah, it's kind of funny to see, like, a woke ally be like, yeah, I support the dolls. It's kind of funny, because I can almost see myself being like, oh, I support the dolls. just because it's almost like entertainingly edgy, which, it's fun to be edgy.
We're going to have a chat about the EHRC guidance, where interim guidance has now come out, in just a moment. Quick spoiler though, it is absolutely atrocious and not in line with protecting trans people's privacy and dignity. And she's not the only member of the government to bow down to the bigots, with Prime Minister Keir Starmer also showing that he'd prefer to listen to a shouty minority over and above the actual community being impacted. Since the ruling, he's said,
well, look, let me just say, obviously we don't usually use such abrasive language, but obviously fuck Keir Starmer. You know what we're about here. We don't F's with Keir Starmer. He's a right dickhead.
The Supreme Court has made it clear that when looking at the Equality Act, a woman is a biological woman. And he said that the court provided clarity. What clarity, honestly?
Well, I would say that saying it's about biological sex provides more clarity than it being based on who knows what. It's what I think. Before this Supreme Court ruling, nobody actually knew what woman meant in the Equality Act, right? Because the moment that because we as a society had been allowing for this trans stuff, who knows what woman means, right? Like, literally, I mean, there was the whole thing, right? Everyone was asking, like, what's a woman? What's a woman? What's a woman? And most people weren't able, like, most trans affirming people weren't able to give an answer to that. So yeah, the Supreme Court has provided clarity by actually ruling on this issue.
The guidance for the above spaces is that trans women should not be permitted to use the women's facilities and trans men should not be permitted to use the men's facilities, stating that otherwise single-sex spaces would no longer be single-sex. But in this context, what is sex being based on? When they say that these spaces will no longer be single-sex, what do they mean by sex? Are they talking about chromosomes, something that we...
Yeah, I've said before, the government needs to issue like an official... They need to get a bunch of biologists together and issue an official definition of sex so that we can all be clear on exactly what it means. Because there is ambiguity around sex. That is perfectly accurate. There isn't ambiguity in the vast majority of cases, so it's still far less ambiguity with trans identity, but there still is ambiguity.
I don't think very many people even know their chromosomes. Plus, trans people can legally change their sex in the UK, which is something that is not really being discussed very much. And
yeah, maybe it should be discussed more. That could be a big development.
Intersex people exist. Nobody seems to give a shit about them. Nobody seems to have even taken 1 second consideration for people who are intersex right now. Gender nonconformity also exists. How will a masculine presenting cis woman prove to somebody harassing her in a public space that she is not a trans woman? Why should a trans woman be harassed when trying to use a public facility? What do these transphobes expect to happen to trans women who are forced into men's bathrooms? How can they not see the danger that those trans women will be put in? And what about trans...
Yeah, look, I mean, this is why, for example, I've always said that at the end of the day, we do need to focus on stopping sexual assault in bathrooms in general, and just saying that the solution, which again, to say stop, I don't think it happens that often. But either way, to say the solution is to basically just make it so some biological males can go into women's spaces, I don't think is addressing the real issue.
In some circumstances, the law also allows trans women not to be permitted to use the men's facilities and trans men not to be permitted to use the women's facilities. It's not...
Yep, that's kind of the rule I would have.
Entirely clear what these circumstances might be, but they've essentially opened it up to trans people being excluded from any single gender space. Not that trans men will want to be using the women's and not that trans women will want to be using the men's.
Oh, sorry, maybe I misunderstood what that was saying then. Yeah, I mean, that is kind of an interesting rule then, in that, yeah, obviously the implication there would be that you can't use anything, which would not be ideal.
This means that any trans person that would actually adhere to these ridiculous guidelines, or is forced to adhere by these guidelines, such as in places like their workplace or school, will have to out themselves by going to a gender-neutral space.
Yeah, by the way, it's worth noting that obviously there's no way of proving something. So you could just decide you're not trans and use whatever, like, use the women's bathrooms. You know, like, essentially, if the concern is, oh, I'm a trans-identified female and they've just said I can't use the women's or the men's bathroom because I'm trans, well, you know, you can just stop being trans for a second because it is just something you've made up.
However, not everywhere offers gender-neutral options.
Anyway, everyone, you know what's really annoying? So obviously last week, as I mentioned, we had technical difficulties if we hadn't had those, we probably would have finished this video today. The issue is that we've still got about, 6 minutes left. 6 minutes that probably is not going to be enough to fill up a whole video next week. So we'll probably just finish that video up, and then we will... whatever, we'll finish this video up next week, and then we'll probably move on to another video. It was, basically, it's just really stupid that we didn't get much of the video done last week, because, it would have been perfect if we... I thought we'd be able to get through 50 minutes. We only got through like 10 minutes. All right. But I will go now. Bye. Thank you for being here.